photo song by Alicia Keys, New Day. Stay tuned.
Take a closer look at how the numbers shaped up. U.S. President Joe Biden signs a raft of executive orders around the pandemic. We'll discuss if the new president can turn the corner on America's battle with the coronavirus. And changing tastes. We'll explore what's driving Chinese palates to adopt diets based more on vegetables and plant-based meats. Well, amid a volatile 2020, China's foreign exchange reserves rose to nearly half a decade high in 2020. CGTN's Gao Ang breaks down the numbers for us.
As China's forex market continues its steady run, officials say the country's foreign exchange reserves grew to over 3.2 trillion US dollars by the end of 2020, up over 108 billion US dollars year on year.
我国外汇储备呢是全球金融市场的重要参与者。
China's foreign exchange reserves plays an important role in global financial markets through responsible long-term investments. China respects international market rules and industry practices and promotes the stability and development of the international financial market. Officials say the maturity of China's foreign exchange market has increased significantly and market expectations have become more rational. Wang Dan, the chief economist at Hang Seng Bank, says there are two driving forces behind the increase.
And one most important driving force is the RMB appreciation. And that is partly because of the trade surplus surging in 2020 after the pandemic. And then also because China adopted a relatively conservative monetary stance after the outbreak in March. So the domestic and foreign interest rate spread has been kept high, and there was a strong momentum for foreign currencies to be converted into yuan.
Facing a complex international environment and geopolitical tensions, Wang says the general principle of China's central bank is to diversify its holdings of foreign currencies. But she warns this will not be easy.
Right now, the biggest component of China's foreign reserve is still dollar-denominated assets. But I do think over time, especially in the coming 2-3 years, the reduction in the dollar-denominated assets will go down. But the pace may not be as fast as many people have anticipated because the liquidity of other currency-denominated assets are not nearly as good as dollars.
Officials say the RMB has rebounded against the US dollar since the second half of 2020, thanks to China's pandemic control efforts. Rising consumption and foreign trade, as well as a stable monetary policy, have also played a role. Officials say uncertainties will remain in the international financial market for 2021. Facing this challenging situation, China says it will strengthen monitoring and risk assessments and at the same time continue to deepen reform and opening up. Gang, CGTN, Beijing.
Meanwhile, China's banking and insurance regulator said China's commercial banks posted net profits of 2 trillion yuan in 2020. That is down 1.8% from a year ago. New yuan loans stood at 19.6 trillion yuan, up almost 3 trillion from the previous year. The regulator said the performance of the commercial banking sector remained steady despite the profit decline. The numbers came as the central government asked lenders to sacrifice earnings to support the real economy during the current coronavirus pandemic. Well, the Beijing-Shenyang high-speed railway has been put into operation Friday after being under construction for more than half a decade. It applies some of China's most cutting-edge technological innovations and will speed up travel between the Chinese capital and the country's northeast. Our Guan Yang has more.
The fastest bullet train in China, the Fuxing is now ready to make its debut run in China's icy northeast. The Beijing-Shenyang Railway is the last section to be completed along the high-speed corridor of northeastern China. It is also a key part in a national railway plan called the 4 Verticals and the 4 Horizontals. Ensuring a fast and comfortable journey in the icy conditions with top speeds reaching 350 kilometers an hour, has been a challenge for the engineers.
那么这个车是高寒动辄组，适应我们。
The trains have been upgraded in order to operate under extremely low temperatures, such as minus 40 degrees Celsius. Preventive measures against snow have also been put in place after a series of test runs.
When the pandemic was gradually brought under control in China since March last year, construction on the Beijing-Shenyang high-speed railway was able to resume. After completion, the day-long trip from China's icy Harbin to the capital can be brought down to just 5 hours. The Beijing-Shenyang high-speed line extends nearly 700 kilometers and now provides the quickest access by train to China's northeast, once the country's heavy industrial base due to its rich natural resources like oil, coal, and timber. The project has taken 6 years from start to finish, requiring railway workers to overcome serious technical barriers.
One major problem we solved was caused by swollen soil in the western parts of Liaoning province. The issue can cause the foundation of the railway to swell up when subjected to moisture. We also established a system to monitor subsidence while laying the railway tracks.
Work on the new line has also helped China test the waters for innovations on future high-speed railway projects. Since 2018, a total of 29 experiments have been carried out along the line, and a series of milestones have been reached.
Some of the tests, such as automatic driving, the Beidou satellite communication system, and the smart maintenance management system, have successfully been applied to the Beijing-Shenyang high-speed railway. These tests provide practical support in building the new standard for intelligent high-speed railway in China.
COVID-19 has posed a series of challenges to the project, from a lack of staff to disruptions for supply chains for raw materials. But with one of the biggest high-speed railway projects in years finally complete, officials say China can continue to develop its nationwide network at a breakneck pace. Guanyang, CGTN, Shenyang.
And let's now get a look at the Beijing starting point of the high-speed railway. CGTN's business correspondent Xia Zheng takes us inside this new transport hub here in the Chinese capital. Take a look.
This is the Beijing Chaoyang high-speed railway station. It is connected with 2 subway lines. The high-speed train station is the first large-scale transportation hub of the 14th five-year plan. That's the entrance behind me. You can beat your card or ticket to get in. And above my head, Chaoyang train station. Of course, upstairs is the waiting hall for our passengers. As the largest station building in the Beijing-Shenyang section, Beijing Chaoyang Station is one of the 4 stations in the capital city. It is a renovation project upon an older train station built in 1966. The construction started in January 2019. I really enjoy the abundance of natural light here on the 2nd floor where the waiting hall is. Because of the design of the ceiling here, very industrial and very futuristic, and it allows a lot of natural light to come into the 2nd floor. So you can see it's very bright and spacious. The whole area is about 183,000 square meters. The station can host as many as 5,000 people. The 3rd floor is going to be the food hall of the station. Just want to talk a little bit more about the Beijing-Shenyang high-speed railway because it's going to be a major section of the much longer Beijing-Harbin high-speed railway. And together, this is a modern high-speed railway transportation solution for northern China. The station has 7 platforms and 15 railway tracks. Here, you can start your journey into the vast northeast China, the former heavy industry center of the country that's developing winter sports and vacation for new growth opportunities. Once the Beijing-Shenyang high-speed train starts operating, it will take you just 2 hours and 45 minutes from the capital city to Shenyang. The new high-speed railway network will attract more business travelers and holidaymakers to northeastern China, a region striving to shake up the stereotype as the Rust Belt of the country. Xia Zheng, CGTN Beijing.
Into the broader Chinese economy now, where earlier this week China announced it achieved 2.3% growth in 2020. Experts believe the country is the only major economy to report positive growth last year. Well, CGTN spoke to Kong Fuok, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN, on how China's growth can support ASEAN economies. Take a listen.
For many years now, that the economic development in China has been the engine, for the global growth. We also, witnessed this during the financial crisis back in 2008. Because of the strong economic growth in China, it helps, other countries to also bounce back very quickly. So, of course, at a time like this, and with a positive and high growth in China, there will be, positive, externalities. Positive spillovers effects on all of the countries in the regions and also in the world. Of course, ASEAN country stand to benefit from this as well. If you look at the amount of trade that ASEAN, has with China, we are now the #1 trading partners of China. So with the strong economic growth in China, of course, it's going to provide a lot of benefit to many other countries in the regions as well.
In time for a short break, still to come here on Global Business. A new president means new actions to combat the coronavirus. U.S. President Joe Biden signs off on a series of executive orders to contain COVID-19. We'll discuss how effective they will be.
.360-degree profiles of industry movers and shakers, tech mavericks, and policymakers. We drill down on their success. We ask how they set strategy and how they navigate in an increasingly competitive market. Real talk, real business. Join the conversation. Biz Talk, only on CGTN.
Well, U.S. President Joe Biden has launched his coronavirus plan. He signed off on a series of executive orders on his second day in office. It includes new rules on masks and quarantine for international travel. Our Sean Calebs explains.
Today's Biden's first full day in office, and he was very busy, basically totally focused on the COVID-19 pandemic crisis in the United States. And members of his staff, his administration, saying that they're shocked how poorly set up the Trump administration was, that there was virtually no national plan whatsoever. They have no blueprint to work from. They say, the Biden administration says they're going to have to start from scratch. We can tell you that Dr. Fauci, we've all seen him talk about the pandemic during the Trump administration. He will remain with the Biden camp, and he is going to be the point person talking about this. This is going to be important. Biden today saying you will not see him or other political figures coming out talking about COVID-19. Only health officials, only science officials. It is going to be a dramatic change from what we saw from Donald Trump. So we also talked about measures that are going on. Anybody flying in internationally now must be quarantined in the United States. Masks are going to be mandated on all flights. All federal buildings, people must wear masks. So there is a great deal of effort going on, but clearly the United States is horribly behind on this. 400,000 deaths to date. Biden today said expect 500,000 by the end of February. He said, look, it is going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
And President Biden has also stopped the process of the American withdrawal from the World Health Organization, which was, of course, started by Donald Trump in July last year. The WHO celebrated the move during its executive board meeting. Our correspondent Mia Alberti has more.
The WHO has welcomed the U.S. decision to remain in the organization. On Thursday, we heard from the Director General, Dr. Tedros, saying that these are good news for the WHO and global health.
WHO is a family of nations, and we are all glad that the United States is staying in the family.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, the U.S.'s top infectious disease expert, told the WHO that U.S. will continue to fulfill its obligations in terms of personnel, but also in terms of financial aid. Let's remind ourselves that the U.S. is the top single contributor to the WHO. In 2019, it gave the organization $400 million. That's roughly 20% of WHO's total budget. So, of course, in this stage of the pandemic, this will be crucial for the organization, especially when it comes to helping lower-income countries. Dr. Fauci also announced that the U.S. will be joining the COVAX initiative, a global mechanism to develop and deliver the COVID-19 vaccine.
I am also pleased to announce today that the United States plans to work multilaterally to respond to and recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. President Biden will issue a directive later today, which will include the intent of the United States to join COVAX and support the ACT Accelerator to advance multilateral efforts for COVID-19 vaccine, therapeutic, and diagnostic distribution, equitable access, and research and development.
Thursday marks a year since the first case of COVID-19 was reported in the U.S. And so by joining this COVAX initiative, U.S. President Joe Biden is showing that he's prioritizing the fight against the pandemic, both at home and abroad. Mia Alberti, CGTN, in Budapest.
Meanwhile, data from the U.S. Labor Department shows 900,000 people filed for unemployment benefits for the first time last week. That's down 26,000 from the prior week. The number comes as coronavirus infections continue to disrupt business operations and consumer demand remains weak. Now, the U.S. Labor Department also saying they've extended government-funded programs for the self-employed, gig workers, and others who do not qualify for such programs. The U.S. economy shed 140,000 jobs in December, the first job losses since April. Well, whether it's the labor market or anything else, President Biden's plans for reviving the U.S. economy, tackling inequality, climate change, education, and infrastructure all depend on taming the coronavirus first. Can he do it? Well, let's get more on this and bring in Harvey Zoden, Senior Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Harvey, welcome to the program. Let me begin by asking you, so President Biden, we know, has this 100-day plan to contain the virus. Are his virus control strategies and vaccination policies, you think, ambitious enough?
I think so. I think there's a chance that they could work, Michael. It's a Herculean effort, and Biden rightly says it's a war on the virus. But the big but is that there are so many variables. Unlike the happy talk we got from our dearly departed Trump, the massive Biden plan is based on science and not politics. If Trump had acted quickly and dramatically in a manner similar to China, up to 99% of the cases could have been prevented. The 500,000 deaths that will reach next month is Trump's America First legacy. However, I do have faith in President Biden. I have faith in Fauci, who yesterday apologized to the WHO for Trump's incompetence. I have faith in Fauci's medical colleagues, who are the best and the brightest. I also put faith in Ron Klain, Biden's chief of staff. Although he's a lawyer, he's very competent and was a very effective Ebola czar for President Obama. So I do think that there's a chance that this could work, but it's going to be a tough slog.
But Harvey, what about actually getting things done? So, of course, we know the Democrats now control the White House and Congress, but the United States still remain divided. So can this new administration get the virus under control, given the polarization and partisanship we see in the country?
I don't think anybody knows yet. It's really up to the American people. We're definitely deeply divided. We're the untied states of America. But even in a more ideal world, our system of government gives much power to the states and local government. And so it's likely that Biden's effort will be handicapped unless he himself can motivate state and local leaders and citizens to come on board. We have a lot of people who think the vaccines are government efforts at mind control and other crazy stuff. Even today, astonishingly, many frontline workers refuse to be vaccinated. Biden, at his bully pulpit, will have to motivate some pretty ornery people to get their jab. Dr. Fauci says that to achieve the tipping point of herd immunity, which Trump called herd mentality, requires 70 to 85% to be vaccinated. That's a really high bar. As recent polling shows that 20% of Americans will refuse to get the vaccine. And the other kicker is that nobody knows how long the protection lasts. Some experts believe that we'll have to get vaccinated every year with a new vaccine, just like for the flu.
A long road ahead indeed for the Biden administration in terms of taming this virus. Harvey, what about fiscal stimulus that we've seen from the United States so far? How sustainable are Washington's direct transfers to American families if the virus is slow to be controlled? I mean, it's much needed, of course, and the quickest way to offer relief. But if the virus is not contained and the vaccination rollout is slow, it just seems like direct transfers are not that sustainable. Shouldn't the spending focus be on an all-out effort on containment instead?
Well, I'm an optimist, so I hope that Biden's very well thought out plan is going to work. But the choice is really either to do a half-assed job like Trump did and kill the economy and settle for a K-shaped recovery where the rich 1% get richer and the other 99% get poorer, or act now with everything we have. A Harvard Institute reckons that while the U.S. government has spent $4 trillion on economic stimulus to date, the consequences of COVID have cost America over $16 trillion, half of that in lost GDP. Biden's proposed rescue plan costs $1.9 trillion. But if it works, some credible economic models forecast a China-like 5 to 6% U.S. GDP growth rate this year. That's something we haven't seen in a generation since President Reagan. When Trump was in office, it seemed that all Republicans were Keynesians. But now, since Wednesday, they reverted to fiscal conservatism. If ever there was a time to do Keynesian pump priming, the time is really now. So we have to spend.
So Harvey, what about the argument then that the U.S. fiscal stimulus should be a bit more targeted? Because right now, many people are receiving checks who still have a job. So shouldn't more funds go to those who really need it the most?
Well, as Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen pointed out in her confirmation hearing, most families are really hurting. And so also interest rates are at historic lows, making money cheap. And so it's a perfect time to shock the economy with a massive stimulus. It's really no time to skimp. It's really as simple and as stark as that.
Okay. All right. Many thanks for your thoughts on this, Harvey. Harvey Zoden, Senior Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, joining us there live from Vienna. Well, looking ahead to next week, the World Economic Forum will host its Davos Agenda Week. The sessions will take place virtually from January 25th to 29th. The theme is a crucial year to rebuild trust. Now, Chinese President Xi Jinping will be the first speaker to give a special speech at the event. CGTN's Tian Wei spoke to Borge Brenda, president of the World Economic Forum, for more on what we can expect. Take a look.
We understand that the Chinese President Xi Jinping is once again going to deliver a speech at this year's Agenda Summit later next week. Tell us more about what the world would like to know more about China.
First and foremost, we are of course very honored that President Xi Jinping comes to the Davos Agenda meeting next week. He will be the first speaker giving a special message on our opening day. And I think a lot of our business participants and also other governments are really looking for signals on how China is going to show leadership also in the post-COVID world, how China is going to handle a re-entry into the Paris Agreement from the US, and also to learn more about also the economic recovery of China. China, in fact, were one of the few economies growing last year, so the rest of the economies have been contracting. So China's leadership now on the sustainable development goals, on climate, but also on the new technologies, also how to address the digital divide, and also how much of a role China will take globally in getting the trade negotiations back also in WTO. I think the world is waiting for, and also to hear really how the president wants to lead China in the years to come.
What do you make of the recent ups and downs of geopolitics?
So firstly, I do hope that 2021 will be a much better year than 2020, also when it comes to global cooperation. So I do hope that in the year to come, that President Xi Jinping and also President Joe Biden will find a good way to work together, because we know if you're going to address the three C's, COVID, climate change, and cooperation, we need the world to come together. And COVID anywhere is COVID everywhere, and climate change doesn't know any kind of border. So we are all in the same boat, and this is also what President Xi Jinping alluded to in Davos in 2017. We do need to work together and also to strengthen the multilateral cooperation. I think we have no alternative to work together. If we're going to see early recovery from this crisis, we also have to continue to trade with each other. So we have to re-energize the World Trade Organization. And this can only be done if China and the US also find a common path, and we can break some of the impulses that we have seen so far. You know, this beggar thy neighbor attitude should stop. It is really about prosper your neighbor. So if others do well, you will do well, and if you do well, others will do well. I think that's what President Xi Jinping also signaled in Davos 2017, that China, as the most populous nation of the world, second largest economy in the world, is willing to work with other nations through the multilateral organizations, is something so important.
And up next here on Global Business. As the world sets its targets on carbon neutrality, we speak with the chairman of the world's biggest producer of low-carbon aluminum to see how energy-intensive industries are making this transition.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
All right, let's get a check on Asian equities now. We've got the market wrap in Shanghai with Tim Pope, in Hong Kong with Joel Flynn, and in Tokyo with Steve Ross. Tim, over to you first. Take us through Friday trade here on the Chinese mainland markets.
Thanks, Michael. It was quite a day for healthcare stocks listed on the Chinese mainland, but just about everything else was lagging. The Shanghai Composite sank about 0.4% today. The China export, though, which is pretty stacked with healthcare and tech firms, hit its highest since mid-2015. It was up more than 2%. Investors were rushing into health shares today as we saw local, city and provincial governments across the country heighten testing and COVID screening ahead of the Chinese Lunar New Year and amid an uptick in domestic cases. Shares in any firm that was really involved with COVID testing were caught up in this surge, both in Shanghai and in Shenzhen. A note from Huaan Securities today said that testing requirements could generate as much as 120 billion yuan in sales for test providers. BGI Genomics was up more than 7% on that news. Wuxi Aptech was up 10%, and mask maker Winner Medical was also winning, gaining 5.7%. Today's gains mean that the Chinext closes the week more than 9% higher than its opening level on Monday. Outside the healthcare arena, though, it was looking like a pretty bleak Friday for Chinese stocks. There were some gains among consumer stocks, but financials, real estate, energy, telecom stocks, all of those were hit with pretty heavy losses. That was Friday in Shanghai and Shenzhen. Let's get a look at Hong Kong now.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, Hong Kong shares endured a difficult session as well, selling almost across the board on the Hang Seng Index. That closed down 1.6% for the day. It still managed to cap a roughly 2% gain for the week, though. Profit taking largely to blame for today's fall. That didn't take the shine off an otherwise stellar start to the year. The offshore benchmark still up around 8% or so for the month. In terms of performance for sectors, energy firms were the biggest fallers here. CNOOC shares led that drop on the HSI, down more than 5%, a third day in a row of falls for the Chinese oil giant, which of course followed news that MSCI would be deleting it from some of its indexes on the back of being added to that US blacklist. Elsewhere, Cathay Pacific also in focus. The Hong Kong airline plunged as well, down around 3% or so as we headed into the close. Reports in the last day or so suggested the local government here is set to require flight crew coming into the city for more than a couple of hours to quarantine for 2 weeks. Investors clearly worried about what that will mean for the very few flights Cathay is still making money from. All in all, though, analysts say things continue to remain positive ahead of the Lunar New Year. Heavy foreign inflows into Hong Kong markets have driven borrowing costs here down to multi-year lows. That likely means there won't be any need for official liquidity support, as is usual ahead of the holiday. Otherwise, that's it from Hong Kong this week. Let's find out how Japanese markets were closing things out now with Steve.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Today's Nikkei 225 index falling roughly 0.4%, finishing at 28,631. Japanese shares retreating from Thursday's 30-year peak finish. Some investors locking in profits and refraining from placing big bets ahead of the corporate earnings season. Ad agency Dentsu Group ending down about 2.2%. Following a report in the UK newspaper The Times stating that the Japanese government has privately concluded the Tokyo Olympics will be canceled. The government flatly denied the report. Tokyo rope surging 28% to a daily limit high after going untraded earlier in the session. Shiseido jumping 4.3% on disclosing talks to sell its shampoo and skincare business to private equity firm CVC Capital Partners. Finally, Panasonic climbing just over 3.25%, benefiting from an increase in its target price by Morgan Stanley MUFG Securities. For now, that's it for me and the rest of the Asia team. Back to you, Michael, in Beijing.
All right, many thanks for those updates. Steve Ross for us in Tokyo, Joel Flynn in Hong Kong, and Tim Pope in Shanghai. Well, U.S. President Joe Biden's administration has temporarily suspended oil and gas permits on federal lands and waters. The move is the latest in a series of orders aimed at fighting climate change and tamping down the U.S. fossil fuel industry. Biden had pledged to permanently ban new drilling on federal land. Federal leases account for a quarter of the country's crude oil output, making them a big contributor to energy supply, but also to America's greenhouse gas emissions. The suspension has been welcomed by environmentalists, but criticized by the oil and gas industry, which warned the move could threaten the U.S. economy. So indeed, U.S. President Joe Biden has pledged to make climate change one of the top priorities of his tenure, and one of his first official moves said the country was returning to the Paris Climate Agreement. CGTN's Xia Cheng spoke to a producer of low-carbon aluminum, a key ingredient in the green economy, and asked if the current COVID-19 economic environment can support a green business agenda. Take a listen.
I see the demand, renewed demand, is actually being fueled by the shift to the low carbon economy, and it's coming from many different directions. So I'm confident that as the world recovers from this terrible pandemic, that actually green growth is going to be the driver of transformation, and not something that's going to hold back growth in the coming decade. And I certainly know that globally, the N Plus Group, with its leadership in low carbon aluminium, which is such an important metal for the low carbon economy, you need it for electric vehicles, for sustainable packaging, for renewable energy infrastructure, that we can make this metal in a way that is consistent with fighting climate change, and that we can really drive down the carbon pollution that historically this sector has been responsible for.
How would you integrate your zero targets with your aluminum business and your hydropower business?
Sure. Well, the N Plus Group is the world's largest producer of aluminium outside of China, but we're also the world's largest producer of low carbon aluminium anywhere. The reason we can do that is because rather than burn coal to create the electricity for this very energy intensive metal, we rely on our huge resource of clean hydropower. But that's not enough. It is still emitting carbon. And we have to get to a net zero position by 2050 in order to support the goals of the United Nations Paris Climate Change Treaty. We've also announced that we will reduce the carbon footprint, the greenhouse gas emissions of our group by 35% by the end of this decade, by 2030.
EN Plus is picking this Chinese partner to work with, and it is a Chinese aluminum processing company. So could you tell me more about how this partnership is going to work and how your zero target is going to fit in?
Absolutely. So our metals company, Rizal, will supply Ming-Tai's plants with low carbon primary aluminium under our Allow brand. And the partnership includes also the new Gwanyang rolling mill in South Korea. And I think this partnership demonstrates a fundamental shift of mindset in many Chinese producers who are not only looking to reduce their own carbon footprint, but are thinking responsibly by addressing the carbon footprint of their whole supply chain of the goods that they manufacture.
US President Joe Biden is taking the country back into the Paris Agreement. What's your take on this change in terms of political environment for green agenda?
In order for the Paris Climate Treaty to be successful, in order to achieve that net zero, we need all of the world's major economies. So whether that's China, the EU, or America, everyone has to be on board. There is a role for everyone. And there will be an opportunity come this November at the climate conference in Glasgow in the United Kingdom for all of those economies to come together and put flesh on the bones of the encouraging statements and goals that they're setting. But it's the detail that's going to be important.
So what can we expect from Biden's green agenda potentially?
Well, I think you'll just see a quickening of the pace. You'll see, certainly, I expect more investment in green infrastructure across the USA, and that's going to be good for the whole global supply chain.
And time for another short break. When we return here on Global Business, we'll show you the trends driving more Chinese taste buds to go vegetarian.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
As more attention is paid to carbon footprints and animal welfare here in China, people are gradually switching to adopt low-carbon lifestyles. This includes going vegetarian, and companies catering to vegetarian and vegan diets have been vying to enter the Chinese market. Our Li Jianhua has more.
Going vegetarian is a trend in China, and food companies have sprung up to meet the demand for a plant-based future. David Yon, a vegetarian for about 20 years himself, opened his shop in Shanghai a month ago.
These are made from non-GMO soy products
it's high protein level, but at the same time, very low fats and no cholesterol.
In a country that's the world's largest consumer of pork, going grain to protect animal welfare is still considered a novelty.
It's going to take some time, not just for us, but for the whole industry to spread the message. Because relatively, if you look at sustainability awareness and animal welfare, some of the other countries in North America and Europe have been talking about this for longer period of time, and China is just starting.
Bigger companies, including Burger King, have jumped on the bandwagon, offering up their own meatless burgers. This is a plant-based welfare. As a vegetarian myself, I don't come to a burger place quite often, and this is my first time to have a plant-based burger. So, as it says here, I have to try to believe it. Wow. It looks very much like meat. It tastes like meat, I have to say. Burger King's veggie burgers are developed by Unilever, which entered the Chinese vegetarian food market last year.
It's still a bit different from real meat, and we're working to improve it. Since production is still quite low, its price advantage isn't yet known. As supply chains and production technology develops, the price will decrease.
To find out whether plant-based meats are ideal substitutes, we went to visit a lab at East China Normal University.
那么如果说长时间的就把这个植物肉当成是真肉一样吃，长时间可能。
If we replace real meats with plant-based ones, in the long term, it may lead to malnutrition. For a majority of people, they can replace part of their diet with plant-based meats, either for environmental or health concerns. But I wouldn't recommend that people replace real meats entirely.
并不建议说大量的人群全部都把它全部替代这个真肉。
The total number of vegans and vegetarians worldwide is hard to pin down, and hurdles still exist for the lifestyle.
Being a vegetarian in China isn't that easy, as restaurant options for vegetarians or vegans are quite limited. The market in China is fairly new, with capital flowing in to take the market shares, and experts are hoping that regulations will be put in place to ensure safety as its popularity grows. Li Jianhua, CGTN, Shanghai.
And of course, China has a long tradition of vegetarian foods, but the modern plant-based meats are also finding an audience here. Justin Shan checks out some of the offerings over in Shanghai.
Many of us couldn't imagine life without it. Meat. For one, meat is a cultural staple, barbecues, luau's, or a nice juicy shaokao on a cold winter's night. And now there's a rival to the old favorites, plant-based meat, designed to give it a taste of meat without the real thing. Many companies are now in the market, Beyond Meat, Starbucks, and Burger King, and many new operators are also showing up for a slice of the meatless pie. Hong Kong-based Green Common opened its first store on the Chinese mainland just a few weeks ago here in Shanghai. The whole store, painted with light green, gray blue, and milky white, well fits the brand's name. Healthy and green, just like the restaurant menu. And there are dishes especially for local consumers like 流口水牛肉片, spicy beef in red oil, and 象极的辣子鸡, Hera spicy chicken, all made from veggies.
Most vegetarian restaurants are relatively traditional, where my mother would go. But in this store, there are many young people and foreigners. I come once a week and spend around 200 or 300 yuan. Especially for we elderly, vegetables are easier to digest. I think it's good to occasionally eat something vegetarian here now and then. I come 2 or 3 times a week at night.
In my hometown in England, it's obviously a lot of fast food and things like that, vegetables. A lot of people do try and cook a lot of vegetables, but to have a fully presented meal with different choices, this is the first few restaurants that I've been to.
For those who want to cook at home themselves, all the ingredients are also available on the shelves along the aisle. Visitors can pick whatever plant-based meat they want to the taste that they prefer. Fish, chicken, pork, or beef, all featuring renowned plant-based meats as well as alternative dairy brands.
The surge in terms of brands, we're seeing this really the last 3 years. I mean, from, of course, North America to Europe to now Asia. When we first opened, there were only a few brands that we were particularly, excited about that, we will introduce to everyone. But right now, in terms of number of brands and the number of SKUs, actually I would say fivefold. I mean, between back in 2015 to now.
But the prices are not low. A package of plant-based beef of 230 grams each costs 62 yuan. While at an ordinary supermarket, a package of beef of 180 grams costs just 26.8 yuan.
At the beginning, usually without the volume, the price is higher. But just like most products, again, once the volume goes up, that's when the average price comes down. I think a lot of price reduction will happen in the next 12 to 18 months. With our own products, we have cut our price twice already since 2018. So each time is about 10 to 12%.
The prospects of the China market for plant-based meat has already attracted a large number of investors. Shenzhen-based Starfield got 3 rounds of investment from giants like Joy Capital, Matrix Partners China, and New Crop Capital. In September, Green Monday acquired funding worth 480 million yuan, the largest investment in the plant-based food industry in Asia. Experts say investors are just looking for the right brands at an early stage of the business and are hoping for benefits in the long run.
At the moment, the market is far from being developed, so there's no dominant players. There are a few Western companies like Beyond Meat, and also there are a few local companies coming into the market. So we do believe that it is still very much in a forming stage. Investors or brands need to have a longer-term vision and patience to develop the market. So it's very important for the brands to constantly, invest to educate the consumer, educate the market.
Data from research firm Markets and Markets show that in 2019, the plant-based meat market worldwide was valued at $12.1 billion US. That number is expected to reach nearly $28 billion US by 2025. Yu warns that while the China market is just beginning to grow, players should be making every effort to develop products that cater to local tastes. The early investments in China could be planting the seeds of a growing and valuable industry. 张世璇 ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
And for more on China's plant-based meat industry, let's bring in Chen Jiahe, Chief Investment Officer at Novum RK Technologies. So Jiahe, first of all, it is getting close to dinner time here in Beijing, and I am certainly very hungry talking about all of this. But let me begin by asking you, how big is the opportunity in China's plant-based meat market? What do you think are the structural drivers of growth going forward?
Good afternoon, Michael. Currently, the plant-based meat is a very new term in the Chinese market, and given the large population of China, anything that can get a share of the market can be a promising business. And that is the same thing for the plant-based meat, and that is the reason why we see so many investments have been made in this area, because everyone just knows that if you can get a grab of even a very small share of the market that has 1.4 billion population, you can make a good business. The drivers of the growth, on the other hand, can come from many areas. For example, the growing consumption power make people focus more on healthy food. The rising payment capability of people with religious believing, these are all the possible drivers that we can look at.
So if you want to capture market share, Jiahe, of course, you have to know what consumers want. So what are the consumer adoption characteristics in China's plant-based meat market that potentially may be different compared to those in North America and in Europe?
That's a very good question here. There is indeed a very big difference. China is a country where Buddhism has affected the largest amount of people. And different from other religions, Buddhism claims not eating meat as a good trait. So in China, many people who choose plant-based meat is doing so out of their religious belief. And this actually has a very long history. There is a famous restaurant brand in Shanghai called Godly or Gongdeling. It was created back in 1922, which is 100 years ago. And this restaurant is famous for making traditional kinds of plant-based meat, which is amazing back 100 years ago. So this plant-based meat industry has a very long history in China, and it has a very local religious background, which you can hardly see in Western economies.
So Jiahe, when you survey the market landscape, what do you think, though, are the biggest bottlenecks to really seeing plant-based meat specifically take off here in this country?
Well, there are basically two biggest bottlenecks for plant-based meat. The first one is the taste. Will the product be tasty enough? Currently, people is working on this, but it seems more successfully conducted in Western societies compared with China, because people consume more burgers in the West. where the taste is much more simplified when compared with the Chinese food. You know, people around the world favor the Chinese food because of its taste. And it's much harder for the plant-based meat to replace the Chinese taste compared with the Western dish. The second is the cost of the plant-based meat. Currently, the cost of this new product is still much higher than the real meat. So the reduction of the cost is also a very important task for this industry.
All right. And finally, Jaffa, looking ahead, what percentage of the total addressable meat market will plant-based meats eventually take in China, you think? Because right now, at least, it's a bit of a drop in the bucket.
It's a very difficult anticipation to make. Currently, the plant-based meat is taking a very small percentage of the total market, too small that it can even be ignored. However, the growth of plant-based meat can be very dramatic one day if the two problems is sorted out. That is the taste and the cost. If something that is tasty enough and cheap enough is invented one day, then we can see a very dramatic increase in a very short period of time. The market can grow even tenfold within just a year. So this is fully dependent on the technology. But this is also the hardest thing to predict. You just don't know when and where such invention will be made. So I think I might just say that let us wait and watch, see what new things can be invented in the first place.
Okay, wait and watch. In the meantime, let's get dinner first. Many thanks for your thoughts, as always, Jiahe.
Sure.
Chen Jiahe, CIO at
Thank you, Michael.
RK Technologies. Well, will writing is traditionally shunned here in China and seen as a taboo, but as our Weilin Tang finds out, increasingly, more Chinese, especially the younger generation, are warming up to the concept. And it's not just because of the coronavirus pandemic. Take a look.
Tracy Zhou is about to turn 28, and she's just made what she deems as the biggest and bravest decision yet in her life, writing a will. She never saw herself crafting one, not until January 2020, when she learned of the death of her favorite basketball star, Kobe Bryant.
After that, a lot of my friends are saying that you never know what will come to your life first, whether it's tomorrow or an accident. So I was triggered by that. I was touched. So I started thinking about leaving something behind. Let me show you this.
She initially penned out memos, notes that she wants to tell her loved ones in her mobile phone. The official writing and registration of her will came months later.
It was happened after I bought my insurance. For my condition right now, the legal beneficiary is just my parents. But I think my friends has given me a lot, like emotionally, mentally in life. They have supported me a lot. So I want to leave something behind for them as well.
Tracy is part of a growing pool of young Chinese jumping on the bandwagon, you could say, to write wills. While experts say the reasons for young people choosing to write wills vary from those of the middle-aged and elderly, it's still a major step forward for China, a country which has no real traditions in this area.
Writing a will isn't just a legal tool. It is also an emotional tool. Many young Chinese write wills not so much to allocate their assets after death, but to express their emotion and affection. Chinese youths are filled with ideas and questions, and are willing to try new things. For some, they may feel writing a will is cool, as they may feel it sets them apart from the pack. For middle-aged and elderly individuals, however, it's more because they've accumulated more assets over time, and they want to guard against family disputes in the future.
Chen Kai founded the China Will Registration Center, a public welfare project, in 2013. As of December 2020, over 186,000 wills have been registered and archived. Those above 60 make up a bulk of this figure. But younger people are also gaining an interest. The amount of registrations from those born after 1990 increased over fourfold in the past 3 years. Those born after 2000, essentially 18 to 20-year-olds, want in too. The COVID-19 pandemic was a fuse to the overall increasing trend from the young to old, but not the main reason, Chen Kai says.
If you brought up the topic of buying insurance in China 30 years ago, people would look at you like you were trying to put a deadly curse on them. But now, Chinese will thank and appreciate the gesture because they see it as an act of kindness. I believe writing a will, too, will emulate the same changes seen with the acceptance of insurance buying. As China plans to double its GDP per capita over the next 15 years, the biggest change will not only be in material comforts, but also in emotional needs and beliefs. I believe will writing is an indicator of concept change.
And Chen believes it's only a matter of time before this happens, and that it may happen even sooner than expected. Wei Lintang, CGTN, Beijing.
And that will do it for this edition of Global Business here on CGTN. I'm Michael Wong here in Beijing. We will be back again at 9 p.m. Beijing time, 13 GMT, for another update of your business headlines. Bye for now.
You're listening to China Plus Radio, connecting you with China and the world.
Now the news. I'm Xiaoyu. China has launched a new high-speed railway service that connects Beijing with the city of Harbin. A newly unveiled 192-kilometer-long section running from Beijing to Chengde started operation on Friday morning. Combined with two previously opened sections, the new high-speed railway extends 1,198 kilometers. The new railway service is expected to shorten the travel time from Beijing to Harbin to about 5 hours. It forges a closer link between the national capital and the northeastern provinces of Liaoning, Jilin, and Heilongjiang. European Union leaders have agreed to consider further restrictions to curb the spread of the coronavirus. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says that with infections rising and contagious variants of the virus spreading fast, non-essential travel should be strongly discouraged within the EU, but essential workers and goods must be able to cross borders smoothly. Leaders discussed a proposal to introduce new trans-border dark red zones where infection rates are particularly high and where all non-essential travel should be discouraged. Travelers from these areas could be required to undergo tests before their departure and be placed in isolation upon arrival in another location. The Chinese mainland reported 94 locally transmitted COVID-19 cases on Thursday. 47 were found in Heilongjiang, 19 in Jilin, 18 in Hebei, 6 in Shanghai, 3 in Beijing, and 1 in Shanxi. Another 99 local asymptomatic cases were newly reported on the same day. The White House has confirmed that U.S. President Joe Biden will be seeking a 5-year extension to the New START arms control treaty with Russia. The treaty is due to expire early next month. It limits the United States and Russia to deploy no more than 1,550 strategic nuclear warheads each. Talks for prolonging the treaty had failed under Donald Trump. U.S. President Joe Biden has unveiled a national strategy to combat COVID-19 that reflects the ideas he set forward during the presidential campaign. The plan aims to ramp up vaccination and testing, reopen schools and businesses, and increase the use of masks. Biden warns that the crisis will get worse before they get better, but he promised that help is on the way. The U.S. House of Representatives has voted to approve a waiver for Lloyd Austin to serve as President Joe Biden's defense secretary. Congress has to pass a waiver to allow the retired 4-star general to take the job, as U.S. law requires Pentagon chiefs to be out of the military for at least 7 years. Austin retired in 2016. He would be the first African American to run the Department of Defense if confirmed by the Senate. China has expressed hopes for work to be done to repair and restore relations with the United States under President Joe Biden's administration. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying made the remarks when she extended China's congratulations to Biden after he was sworn in. Hua noted that China-U.S. relations became strained under former President Donald Trump's administration. Hua expressed the hope that the Biden administration will help restore the relationship, but stressed that China will continue to defend its sovereignty. The Canadian Governor-General has stepped down from her position amid allegations of workplace harassment. Judy Payette resigned hours after the conclusion of an independent probe against her. Reports say the details of that report are damaging. Payette was appointed as the representative of Queen Elizabeth II in October 2017 on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's recommendation. She will be replaced temporarily by Richard Wagner, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada. Chip maker Intel has reported an all-time record of $78 billion for its 2020 full-year revenue, up 8% year-on-year. Last year marked Intel's 5th consecutive year of record revenue. It generated a record $35.4 billion cash from operations and returned nearly $20 billion to shareholders. And that's the news. I'm Xiaoyi.
Today, provide you with in-depth news and expert analysis, tell you the whole story and predict. Bring you the news you want to know. On Today.
The United States turned the page as Joe Biden becomes the country's 46th president.
We'll press forward with speed and urgency, for we have much to do in this winter of peril and significant possibilities. Much to repair, much to restore, much to heal, much to build, and much to gain. The
with the mess left behind by Trump, will Biden be able to rescue? You are listening to Grow Today, the panel discussion with me, Anna, in Beijing. Joe Biden was sworn in as the 46th President of the United States on Wednesday. He made a plea for national unity in his inaugural address as economic, health, and the political crisis gripped the nation. So will President Biden put the nation back together, and how will he handle this crisis with Trumpism lives on? So to dig more into these questions, let's bring our guests. Laura Belmont, Professor of History and Dean of the Virginia Tech College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences. Aaron Call, Political Commentator, Director of Debate at University of Michigan. Timothy Lynch, Professor of American Politics and Associate Dean of School of Social and Political Sciences, University of Melbourne. And Leo Quinn, our former Chief Correspondent in Washington, D.C. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Hello. Great to be here.
Morning.
Great to be here.
So, Professor Belmont, years from now, how do you think the history will define Trump presidency?
It's Belmonte.
Oh, sorry, Belmonte.
So that's fine. I think that history will probably not judge the Trump presidency very positively. I think indeed this will be judged to be one of the worst presidencies in U.S. history. I think one of the core reasons of that is that Trump had really made no pretense whatsoever of trying to govern the entire country. At no point did his approval rating exceed 50%. He left office with a 34% approval rating, and any number of ways in which he shattered the norms of the presidency. It's very chaotic and divisive, and it remains to be seen how much of the things he achieved will actually endure. Joe Biden has already halted construction on the border wall, for instance, and many of his some immigration restriction policies will be reversed. And I think that there really isn't a signature Trump legislative achievement analogous to something like the Affordable Care Act that will live on after him. So I think it will be a very tangled, in many ways, negative legacy.
Aaron, what's your take? What will Trump's presidency mean to American history?
Yes, I agree with everything that's been said. Probably be considered, if not the worst president, one of the worst few presidents of all time, joining James Buchanan and others. And I think that given everything that happened at the Capitol so late in his administration, just weeks before departing, that's what the administration could be remembered for. And so some earlier accomplishments like deregulation and tax cuts and other things will be overshadowed. But there certainly will be some legacies, I think, remaking the federal judiciary, appointing over 200 federal judges that have lifetime appointments will be something. And he was a president that had no previous military service or political service, and he was brought in to shake up the establishment, and certainly he will do that. But through executive orders and even congressional legislation, through thinly passed majorities, President Biden will be able to remove a lot of the legacies, and he won't be considered fondly. Although with time things can change, but having such tumult happen at the waning days of your administration, being the first president ever impeached twice, those are not things that history looks fondly on.
Professor Lynch, on what will history make of the President Trump's legacy in the past 4 years? Do you think historians in the future will see Trump and this period of U.S. history as we do now?
Well, good evening, everyone. Yes, I think history tends to be kinder after a while to any presidents, even the terrible ones. So I can imagine, if they're not underway already, there are revisionist accounts which I'm sure could be written about Trump. And I share what my fellow panelists have said, but I would add the caveat that without COVID, and it's very hard to blame Donald Trump for COVID, certainly for some of the chaotic response to it, you could lay at his door, although I think it's a problem more widely shared because of the federal system. Without COVID, he looked like he would have won. He delivered an economy and brought in enough voters into the Republican camp to suggest he would have won. So I'm just cautious of this in the moment gloating by anti-Trump politicians and forces, because this guy, despite his inadequacies and inanities and incompetencies, got extremely close to winning, and losing in large part was something separate from his behavior. So that's the caveat I think I'd offer. The other thing, just very quickly, he's not leaving with an Iraq war or an Afghanistan war or with the destruction of Libya. The Middle East in some ways has benefited from some of Trump's diplomacy. So without being the man that writes that revisionist account, I can see that you could construct a more sympathetic case for what he's done in the world.
Kun, how will you define Trump's presidency from China's perspective?
Well, I think maybe I can talk more about what internationally Trump's presidency has meant for the world. I think I think the world will remember among all things his America First policy, if not those very lots MAGA hats in the TVs and also in the pictures. I think internationally, America First means U.S. Is questioning the current international order, which was established on American primacy of the world, and Americans are questioning the multinational organizations. Also promotes the theory that American is taken advantage over the past few decades. And domestically, I think I agree with Timothy that I think America starts to think about whether United States has invested way too much overseas, either in terms of the military intervention or in terms of maintaining the alliance centered on United States. And I think I would quote Lindsey Graham, Trump's once very close ally on the Hill, that President Trump will prove to be a very consequential U.S. president. And that is true for U.S.-China relations, too. I mean, we can speak more on that. I think the damage Donald Trump has done to the U.S.-China relationship is very far-reaching, and it's I don't want to sound overly pessimistic, but I think it's very hard to restore any kind of trust between the two right now.
Then, Kun, if you have to settle one event in Trump's presidency, what would it be?
Well, it's a difficult question, but I have to go with, of course, the Capitol riot. I think it's an epitome of the many crises in America, 4 years, if not many years in the making, like racial injustice, the wealth gap, clash between, the progressiveness and conservatism. These issues have always been there, but Donald Trump's presidency, his way of leading, and his character, he lit the fire, and that I think you just cannot take the image out from history.
Professor Belmonte, what's the one event to you?
Well, I think I would draw a distinction between the one international and the one domestic. Internationally, I think the 2018 press conference with Vladimir Putin, where Donald Trump took Vladimir Putin's side and accepted wholesale his denials of interfering with the 2016 presidential election over the entire U.S. intelligence establishment. That was quite a jaw-dropping moment for us to do that, for him to do that with a country which had, of course, been our major adversary through the many decades of the Cold War. Domestically, I think absolutely January 6th, the Capitol insurrection, because it really became the culmination of a lot of the destabilizing trends of the Trump presidency, the use of falsehoods. This was preceded by months of Donald Trump setting the stage for people to believe that if any outcome other than him winning the presidential election would be fraudulent. The flirtation and encouragement of far-right extremist groups, anti-government militias, groups like the Proud Boys, conspiracy theorists like QAnon, and having that all come to an explosive point at the seat of America's representative government was quite a remarkable and shocking turn of events.
Aaron, how about his performance in controlling the pandemic? As we know, U.S. has recorded over 400,000 deaths to the COVID-19. And do you think Trump, as the president of the country, will be held accountable for this?
I do. And, sometimes, obviously, it's unfortunate. This is a once in a generation, every 100-year pandemic, and that he was president during it. But that's, what happens. And the presidency, went by for about 3 years, and him never having previous experience and without, being tested or a major impact. And all of a sudden there's a major public health issue that comes up. And it shows why having experience, someone like Joe Biden who's been in public service for 50 years, that is important. And yes, we are now over 25 million cases, over 400,000 deaths, comparing very poorly to the rest of the world. And after the election defeat in November, the president's basically checked out for the last several months and left most of the administration to Vice President Mike Pence. And it all started with the top. Masks, for some reason, in the United States became political. And many of his supporters chose not to wear them. I think if he had to do it over, branding those masks and making them red with a campaign slogan would have been both a public health benefit and also probably politically advantageous. And so just all the leadership started from the top and was very poor. And even he got COVID and in the middle of everything, and came very close to was very sick. And so it was just the way in which he handled it. The people that he had that were in charge of it, and really, yes, it couldn't have done worse. And in addition to being a public health disaster, also it did hurt politically as well. People didn't like how he handled it, especially moderates, and it did hurt in the November election. So it's in some ways could be a big defining part of his presidency.
Professor Lynch, from the very beginning, Trump showed a willingness to challenge the norms, which was welcomed by many Americans who are unhappy about the elites, professional politicians, and pinned by members' policies. So has that changed after 4 years?
Well, I think that's it's a very important question that gets to the core of Trump's transformation of the system. And I think he did this crudely, and I think he did it chaotically. But what he did was provide a voice to people, 74 million of them, who felt that political debate, economic policy, the culture that they thought they understood and had a place in, was being run in a way that confused them. And more than this, that large swathes of his supporters were being vilified and mocked by some of those elites. Now, I don't think we should, I don't want to get involved in rerunning 2016, but the Hillary Clinton campaign, it highlighted a lot of the disaffection that many of the white working class that used to be represented by the Democratic Party felt about the way the Democratic Party now spoke on behalf of business elites, campus elites. And more than that, actually seemed to be going out of his way to say that the white working class was part of the problem. They enjoyed white privilege, or they were deplorable. Now, I'm not endorsing that interpretation, but Trump was a very important vehicle for a political position which the two main parties had done their best to avoid having to confront. And his contribution, even though he was a foolish man at in lots of ways, he's made it almost impossible now for both parties to ignore this forgotten middle. And I think that's going to be his key contribution domestically.
Quinn, do you think the extremism went mainstream in the United States during Trump's presidency?
Well, for me, I think during my time traveling in and reporting from many states in America, I see the polarization, or the extremist, or you can call it extremist or right-wing opinions in America, like in real people. And I see this stark contrast of views between, let's say a liberal in the Bay Area versus a working class man who used to work in an auto manufacturing company, but then was laid off during the company's relocation. And I think these people are having a feeling that they are being left out. They are being taken advantage of during either globalization or the development of United States, and they do not have a voice. And certainly, I think Trump is promising that I'll represent you and I will make sure that you will be heard. He promised that, but whether he has delivered that promise remains to be a question, I think.
Professor Belmonte, is that a fair statement? To say Trump leaves behind an even more polarized America?
I think that's absolutely true. I think there are always divides in America. That dissent is the heart of a democratic society. But I certainly feel that in my lifetime, it really has been since the late 1960s, since the country has been this divided. I think that Trump did give voice to a lot of Americans who have been left behind by 40 plus years of neoliberal policies, who were really displaced by globalization, formerly well-paying jobs that, were facilitated by unions. Unions have been really weakened in the last few decades, have left a lot of Americans feeling very discontented and really in a lot of economic marginalization. And Trump gave voice to that. And I think his style, his crudeness, his willing to be cruel, in some ways was part of the attraction. They wanted a strong man. They even evangelicals in the United States, one would have thought that a man who had been divorced twice, who was accused of sexual assault multiple times, that he would be a very unlikely standard bearer for them. But they supported him in droves, and many would say something to the effect of, we didn't want a choir boy, we wanted a bulldog, and that's what they got. And I'm concerned about now, though, is some of those voices that were empowered by Trump are extreme. And I don't know how we put the genie back in the bottle now when the FBI has been warning for several years about a rise of far-right extremism. And just because Donald Trump isn't president anymore, and just because we had the Capitol riot, I don't think that's the end of a violent expression of some of those currencies that are running rampant in America right now.
Aaron, what's your take on blaming the divisiveness on Trump? Because as far as I know, many people believe there are deeper structural problems, and Trump is just a trigger. Do you share the same stand?
Yes, I do. These tensions have existed for a long time, and as previously mentioned, the inauguration of Richard Nixon in 1969 were under similar circumstances where there was political violence and assassinations, and so this has just been a part of the country. We're in a two-party system, and the country has a lot of different opinions that constantly shift. But yes, some of the policies and the problems existed even before President Trump was a candidate. He really reflected them, and in some ways, kind of took over the Republican Party. And so he may have, given his personality, his reality show background, he was the perfect one to stoke a lot of the issues, and trying to pitting people against each other. It was something that was politically advantageous to him, and maybe other people wouldn't have been as successful with that. But I mean, going back to the 2000 election, it was decided by 537 votes in one state, and the control of the presidency and Congress has shifted in the last several decades, almost every cycle. And so the country remains divided. But I think in the inaugural address, Biden tried to say, even if you didn't vote for me, still plan to be your president, want to try to get past this red and blue state dichotomy, and if nothing else, just hope that some people would give him a chance. He's not going to be able to convert these 74 million Trump supporters, but at least, as opposed like with the Obama administration, where some Republicans tried to declare a dead on arrival and make him a one-term president immediately, he smartly tried to at least say, well, give me 100 days, a few months to see what the agenda is like, what the tone is, before making a definitive judgment.
Professor Deng, in Trump's farewell address, he promised his supporters that, quote, quote, the movement is only just a beginning. And he's starting to build up a legal team for his impeachment trial. So what signal do you think he's sending to his supporters?
Well, I think clearly his number one priority in life is to be the center of attention. Well, what I suspect what he will find is with the trappings of power and presidency now denied to him, and likely to be permanently denied to him, whether that's through an impeachment trial or whether it's just through simple aging and other people replacing him, he will have he's likely, as the oldest ex-president in American history, that has been replaced rather, unfortunately, one won't be claimed by the oldest ever elected president, but he's likely to go into some decline at some point. It's already the Proud Boys, as far as we're obliged to weigh what they say, but they've already called him a failed president. And I imagine some of the fracturing of his support is going to become more prevalent. I mean, the whole absurdity of the attack on the Capitol really highlighted not the dark, sinister, well-mobilized reactionary rightist forces in America, but just how ridiculous they were. And they only got as far as they did because they had a president, one-term president, prepared to indulge them. And I think, not wishing to be deliberately controversial, this is bad news for the Democrats. The Democrats need to stoke Donald Trump. They need Donald Trump to remain present in the politics, because it means people don't concentrate on the internal divisions within left-wing politics, within progressive politics. So there's a vested interest amongst Democrats, I think, to keep Trump present, because he will continue to invalidate conservative politics, and that's a big problem for the Republican Party.
Professor Belmonte, what's your take on this? Do you think in U.S. election in 2024, will there likely have a Republican candidates to run for president against Joe Biden and have a Trump style?
Well, I think that Timothy touched on something that's really important a few minutes ago, and with which I completely agree, and that is that had the pandemic not happened, Donald Trump quite likely would have won a second term, and the complete incompetence and misleading U.S. response to the pandemic under his leadership played a significant role in swaying the outcome of this election. But now the party, the GOP, is really, I think, biding its time in some ways. Senator McConnell is now trying to delay the impeachment trial a bit, because I think they're trying to see where the dust is going to settle about what happened with the Capitol riot. But they also have internal divisions on the right. You certainly have people like Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri and Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, who are very eager to be the new standard bearer for the very powerful Trump base.
Thanks, everyone. You are listening now. It's our live broadcasting for World Today. Let's have a short break. We'll be back in a minute.
Hello, this is Michael Zhang. Greetings from Los Angeles of the Golden State of California. Thank you today for making me part of your team. I truly enjoyed the debates we had and look forward to many more in the years to come.
Hello, I'm Joya Seed, First Secretary of the Embassy of Chile to China. It's been an honor taking part on your show and telling you about the relationship between Chile and China. Wishing you all the best.
In-depth analysis, valuable insights, expert views, presented by an award-winning team. Today, keeping you well-informed, up-to-date, and ahead of the news.
Welcome back to World Today, the panel discussion on U.S. former President Donald Trump's legacy and what to expect from the new president, Joe Biden. So to continue our discussion, Professor Belmonte, sorry for the interruption before. So could you please continue your statement on Trumpist? Do you think the Trumpism lives on and keeps growing in the United States?
Well, I think, to resume what I was saying, I think that the GOP is really at a critical crossroads. President Trump raised over $200 million in the last weeks of his presidency, which gives him a formidable war chest to play a king-making role within the party. And but what I think is going to happen is a couple of things. One, President Trump is going to have to compete with other presidential aspirants within the party, like Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri and Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, who, of course, were leading the charge on the floor of Congress to vote to invalidate the certification of the electoral votes from Pennsylvania and Arizona, and who see themselves as likely successors to Trump. But that is going to have to coexist with more mainstream Republicans like Senator Romney from Utah, who want to push the party back in an older style of having a defined party platform, analogous to the 1980 Republican platform that Ronald Reagan won on. But the Reagan vision for the party was really on fumes by the 5-6 years ago. And Trump, I think, one of his great strokes of genius was recognizing that older party platform message wasn't really resonating with a significant portion of the electorate and offering them a really stringent alternative. And the question now becomes, how much power can Trump have outside of the presidency? And we'll have to see how it all shakes out. It's going to be, the tumult is going to continue.
Aaron, about the Trumpism, was the Trump presidential style a new model? The next Republican candidate might follow suit.
I think that politically that would be wise, given how well that President Trump did when he was on the ballot. He'd be getting 74 million, the second most times ever, and the Republican Party has benefited when President Trump's been on the ballot, 2016 and 2020, but not fared well in the midterm elections in 2018 or even the runoff races in Georgia in this past month. But Donald Trump is a unique politician, having never had the typical background and experiences of one, coming to politics so late in life. And so while others previously mentioned, Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, many others are trying to imitate the Trump brand, I don't think anybody's been able to successfully do it. And I'm unsure that that's going to be able to be the case in the future. I mean, we've seen political debates change now, and people try to emulate his style and abrasiveness, and questions, press conferences. Mike Pompeo and others, their responses were very Trumpian, but really, so far, it's only worked for him. And I'm just very skeptical that others have the personality, the media skills, the confidence in themselves, not worrying about elite opinion and what others think. And so I think that there's likely going to be a pivot. I mean, there have been some discussion here in the past few weeks that President Trump is thinking about starting a third party. He considered running for president as a third party candidate several decades ago. And so we could see a break from him from the Republican Party. The upcoming trial in the Senate, which will likely be in February, if there are 17 Republicans that vote to convict him, and it only requires 50 votes then to bar him from political office in the future, and that would precipitate a break between Trump and the party. But he's going to likely primary many establishment Republicans at the gubernatorial 2022 elections or others, and so he may have his own interests in things that may not align with the core establishment of the Republican Party going forward.
Aaron, at the beginning, as Professor Lynch mentioned about Trump's economic accomplishments, so Trump pointed out during his farewell address, there were 148 stock market highs during his term. He emphasized again about slashing regulations and creating new trade deals and getting the country on the path to recovery. What do you make of Trump's legacy on U.S. economy and trade?
Yeah, I think it's going to be mixed, and certainly, he pointed to the stock market, but there has been a lot of volatility with that, especially during the last year because of coronavirus. If you compare the stock market performance just to some recent Democratic presidents, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, there was actually a worse performance under the Trump presidency, and that's something that he's touted just so much. And if you look at what the stock market's done since the election, and November 7th, when it was clear that Joe Biden would be victorious, and it's reacted favorably to a Biden presidency and a likely additional stimulus package passing Congress in the next few months. And at one point, Trump said that if Biden won the presidency, that the stock market would crash. And certainly that has not turned out to be the case. But he does have some legacies. I think the reducing of environmental regulations, with a lot of things he did through executive order, will be part of that. And the trade deals, most prominently kind of renegotiating the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement. Many of the hundreds of federal judges that he's appointed are going to share that economic philosophy and be anti-regulations, be pro, and make a lot of pro-business decisions. With the untimely death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, getting to appoint a third Supreme Court justice in just 3 years will be a legacy that will last for decades. And the Supreme Court is so important when there's a lot of business and economic cases before it. So that is, the economy, and given the fact that he touts himself as a successful business person who's, supposedly a billionaire, which he says, that will certainly be a part of his legacy. But with the coronavirus and him handling it poorly the last year, that's also had a really difficult impact on the economy through job losses and the volatility in the stock market. So it's definitely going to be a mixed bag.
Cohen, speaking of U.S. trade deals, the elephant in the room is the trade frictions with China. Trump started in 2018. So some in the U.S. believes that China's rise is a threat to the United States. But how will you characterize Trump's China policy and on trade?
On trade, well, I think, first of all, I want to point out that, yes, during Trump's 4 years in the White House, they did have 148 stock market highs, but they were also 4 times during March last year when the circuit breaker had to be triggered in the U.S. stock market to stave off a full-blown collapse because of the fear of the COVID-19 pandemic. And also, when you evaluate the Trump economy, you have to remember that he inherited it from Obama, a much better U.S. economy than when Obama took office. And well, the 2 notable things about Trump's economic policy, as Aaron has pointed out, one is the tax cut. Tax cut remains to be controversial, to say the least, because a lot of the debate has been focused on whether it really benefits the average Americans or the big corporations in America. The trade war, I think, a lot of the attention, I think, is put on. It's widely believed, I think, in the United States that trade wars have hurt American consumers and businesses. He was trying to start this trade war to make China cave into the American pressure and to adjust domestically in terms of China's economic policy. But well, China's trajectory has been always determined on its own, and whether Trump has achieved its goal remains to be questionable.
Professor Belmonte, for U.S., China, and the rest of the world, what are the main impacts of Trump's China policy on trade, in your opinion? Is there any silver lining in it?
I think that is one thing that Trump has done that will really affect the Biden presidency is really try to call China out on some aspects in which China has taken advantage of some of the loose enforcement of trade rules on issues like intellectual property theft, cyber espionage. And I think that this harder line that he's taken on China is going to create a tightrope act for the Biden administration, in that I think your former colleague is right in that American consumers have really, the disruption of supply chains has really harmed American consumers. There are many products that it takes weeks or even months to get now, because we do import so many things from China. And I think the tariffs, which Trump Mexico was going to pay for the wall, well, China was going to pay for the trade wall. Well, that didn't happen either, and that also had a big impact on American farmers, which Trump and Congress offset by billions of dollars of subsidies directed to American farmers. So a lot of the moving forward from here, I think we're at a different juncture than we were 5 years ago, and we'll have to see where the Biden administration goes.
Professor Lynch, for the Biden administration, what kind of inheritance it gets on U.S.-China relations? What would be Biden's priority when it comes to China?
Well, I think Laura has made a very interesting and important argument there, that we're likely to see much more continuity from Trump to Biden, particularly on trade and particularly on China. But Biden's particular problem when it comes to the China question is that for much of his time in Congress, he was a backer of free trade deals like NAFTA, like permanent favored nation status for China. He was one of the politicians that bought into that operating assumption that the more you trade with the People's Republic, the more ultimately it will liberalize and you'll get democracy. Trump is the first president in 30 years, certainly since the end of the Cold War, to actually call time on that. And I think Biden is likely to accept that he's been wrong about the effects of trade liberalization, and is likely to stick to quite a hardcore line when it comes to Chinese trade, not least because as a retail politician, he understands that even though he must at some point defer to some of the woke vocabulary of his base, he also knows that he's a blue-collar Democrat that represents working-class people. And the analysis of many of those people, lots of whom voted for Donald Trump, is that their status in the culture and the wider economy has been stolen by the Chinese economy. He can't suddenly be seen to go soft on China, which is why I think you'll get much more of a continuation of Trump's attitudinal approach, his hardline approach, than Biden is probably willing to admit at the moment.
Aaron, are we going to see some new approaches when Biden dealing with China-U.S. relations, or maybe it's too late and too difficult to turn the tide?
Yes, I think probably more the latter. I mean, I think that in terms of tone, it'll likely be different. I mean, there won't be some members of the administration around with brash personalities that have good sound bites, people like Peter Navarro or Mike Pompeo, and in terms of Biden's ambassador and some of his major administration figures will be more from politically establishment, the Democratic Party, probably from the Clinton and Obama administrations, and so there'll be probably a return to civility. But in terms of policy, I think it's likely going to be fairly comparable, given just some of the political dynamics in the United States with the upcoming elections in 2022 and 2024, and what we've seen so far indicates that there's not going to be much of a difference at all at the tail end of the Trump administration, beginning of the Biden one. There was new sanctions coming on some of the people that had served in the Trump administration and some U.S. Politicians. And if you listen to any of the confirmation hearings for Biden's cabinet, people like the Secretary of Defense and others, they were certainly asked about China, and a lot of their answers would have been identical to what happened in the Trump administration, that they view China as a great competitor, the top competitor, and are going likely to pursue very similar policies. And so that, speaking of Trump's legacy, that on China and trade and things like that, I believe are likely to continue on to the Biden administration and future ones as well.
Quinn, what's your take on this?
I think maybe excuse me, we have to give credit to Donald Trump, because I think he pretty much changed the U.S.-China discourse in America. I think because I think before Trump, the rise of China, the development, the economic rise of China was only on the radar of Americans' elites. But after Trump, I think the rise of China is on the radar of average Americans, the American public. But I disagree, or I think it was wishful thinking. I don't want to characterize it like that, but I think it is something always only in the mind of Western media or Western discourse, that the more you trade with China, the more you can recruit China into the Western way of governing or the Western way of governance along the way. Because I think China has since China opened up to the world in the late 1970s until today, China has made pretty clear that China will have a system of its own. It will have a governance on its own terms, not on the terms of the United States, not on the terms of Western economies, not on the terms of anyone else's. And that has been China's intention, and it has made that clear. And I think this is a hard truth. I think Western countries or any other countries has to maybe take a break and think about it. And also moving on, I think maybe that is something that needs to be respected in any bilateral engagement or bilateral interaction between China and the United States.
Quinton, What do you make of China's position when facing a new administration?
Well, China's foreign ministry spokesperson has already said that she hopes that dialogue and communication will resume, and the two sides can have more productive dialogue in the future. I do think this is a point where both sides can seize and also take on because the U.S.-China relationship has really changed. The dialogue has changed over the past 4 years, and now it's a time it's calling for leadership from both sides, because I think it's a time when both leaderships can decide what kind of order or what kind of balance you want to have between the two powers, and what kind of mechanisms of exchanges and communications that you want to have, so that when you have crisis, you can talk to each other when needed. And also, I think the Chinese leadership has made it quite clear that China does not intend to overthrow the current international system, and the ball is in Biden's court for him to declare, what kind of China strategy we're going to have.
Professor Belmonte, do you think Biden's new team will affect Biden's China policy?
I think I would echo what my fellow panelists have said, that there will be continuity here. I think there are some immediate issues that the Biden administration will have to deal with: the tensions in the South China Sea, the U.S. relationship with Taiwan and how that will fit into its relationship with mainland China, the declaration that China's relationship with the Uyghurs is a genocide. Those are all very immediate things, in addition to this longer term trend with the trade tensions. Those all are going to require some immediate attention. And I think that your colleague's point about that the United States is really going to have to grapple with the fact that China is putting forward an entirely different model for global leadership. When Deng Xiaoping declared to get rich as no sin in the late 70s, and China, opened its economy to enormous success, really having a rate of growth in the 1990s that is among the highest in world history, and being one of the only countries in the world this past year to see a rate of economic growth that exceeded most developed nations. But they haven't loosened the restrictions on civil liberties, and the supposition that the more consumption and capitalist exposure people had, that the government would change, and that citizens of China would decide that they want a different model of governance. There are certainly episodes of that, with the pro-democracy demonstrations in Hong Kong that have just been suppressed. But I think that China is also is wielding a lot of soft power. You think about the role it's playing in economic development in Africa, for instance. And I think that this is going to be a really central foreign policy concern going forward for the immediate future.
Quinn, would you like to have a response to that?
Well, I think a lot of the immediate problems, as Laura has mentioned, do need communication and dialogue, maybe from this moment, from both the foreign policy teams of both sides. But I think there's a fundamental thing between the U.S.-China U.S.-China relationship right now is that there's almost zero trust between the two sides, and you have to pick one point, pick one side, one thing of the relationship that you can work on to build that trust again. And I think right now, since the world is grappling with a once in decades international pandemic, I think that will be one thing that the two sides can gradually start working on to build that or restore that relationship and then that trust. I mean, America needs a lot of protective equipment, and China can produce that. The two can also work on vaccine distributions, etc. This is just a starting point. The essential thing is that you start talking, and from that you move on to the bigger picture.
So from the bigger picture about global leadership, Aaron, is Trump's because in Trump's farewell speech, he listed his achievements on global leadership, saying that his administration has restored American leadership abroad, and he's the first president in decades who has started no new wars. How do you evaluate U.S. global leadership in Trump's time?
Yes, I think that he has an interesting definition of leadership. Certainly, the alliances and things have become frayed. I think partnerships and even institutions such as NATO have weakened in the last 4 years. And you see the first few things that Biden did: rejoining the World Health Organization, rejoining the Paris Climate Accord. These were things where United States leadership had been accustomed to over many decades, and it just was not the case in the last 4 years. Just because he decreased troop commitments and there weren't the starting of new conflicts doesn't mean that, in terms of the U.S. being respected or having solid relationships with allies and things like that occurred, because I don't think that's the case. President Trump was always very was trying to get many long-standing allies to pay for military commitments and bases and things like that, which has strained relationships with Germany, other countries, NATO, South Korea, and so I don't think that Biden will be so concerned about the fair share of dues and things like that. And I think Biden will return to more traditional leadership, given the relationship to previous administrations of Clinton and Obama. And so I think that it's going to be a more multilateral approach and an attempt to take back the United States role in leadership in the country. And human rights is going to be another big focus that has lagged in Trump in the last 4 years.
Professor Lynch, Aaron mentioned of U.S. relations with its allies under Trump's White House. So how do you view NATO and transatlantic ties in the past 4 years with Trump's American First policy?
Yes, that's a good question. And Aaron made a lot of good points, but I would part company, I think, on a few. I think the easiest defense of the Trump administration, I think, is going to be in terms of foreign policy. If we look back over the last 30 years, it's been a series of catastrophes on behalf of US power, some of which happened because of the will of the international community and sometimes in defiance of it. If we look at NATO in Kosovo, an action that didn't have congressional support, no UN mandate, it was the template for the Iraq War in 2003. And we know what a disaster that turned out to be. Afghanistan, America's still trying to extricate itself from. And then the terrible dereliction in Libya, and then choosing to let hundreds and thousands of die in Syria. These are all on the account of his predecessors, not of Donald Trump. So I think we exaggerate the extent to which he walked away from alliances, because these alliances didn't make the world any more rule-bound in the previous 30 years. And in fact, according to Donald Trump, and I think he was onto something here, all it did was increase the burden on the American economy and on the American men, and mostly were men in uniform, that were obliged to die in defense of these internationalist causes. So I think you could make the case that Trump pardon the pun, but landed a few blows